The top 10 scary Ohio urban legends. Starting off at number 10 now, we have the Blue Flame Ghost. The story goes that in the 1930s, a woman lived in Ohio's Sugar Grove. She was young, happy, and liked by everyone. She fell for a young man who had a terrible temper, and the couple were often seen arguing in the town. Over time, the locals noticed her changing. She never smiled anymore and began to grow cold and weary. One night, the couple were parked beside a bridge when, naturally, an argument broke out. This time, it was worse than usual though. In a fit of anger, the young woman pulled out a knife and stabbed her fiance's throat. She kept slashing until his head came off. She herself was bleeding from the struggle. She staggered out of the car and back down the hill, carrying her fiance's head. She eventually collapsed and died at the bottom of the hill, where she was found by locals the next day. Since then, the old bridge has been replaced by a new concrete one. However, some still say that on certain nights, if you stand on the bridge and call out the woman's name, her glowing blue spirit will appear at the top of the hill and move towards you. What you do at that point is honestly up to you, but given the vengeful state in which she died, most people don't stick around. Next up at number 9 now, we have the Defiance Werewolf. This is a very famous one. The people of Defiance in Ohio have claimed that for the past 45 years or so, they've been terrorized by a werewolf. It was first sighted in 1972. Over the summer, there were many sightings of a rampaging, hair-covered beast on 2 legs. It was said to have a muzzle and was always covered in rags. The local media went into a frenzy, and even the police opened up a case file on the sightings. There have been many sightings since then. Many of them were around a series of old railroad tracks in the town, usually late at night. One of the first sightings was by a Mr. Davis. Now he said, "I was connecting an air hose between 2 cars and was looking down. I saw these huge hairy feet. Then I looked up and he was standing there with that big stick over his shoulder. When I started to say something, he took off for the woods." His friend, Mr. Jones, was with him at the time. He said, "At first I thought the whole thing was a big joke. But when I saw how hairy and woolly it was, that was enough for me." Next up at number 8 now, we have Brubaker Bridge. According to legend, in the 1930s there was a brutal 1-car accident on this bridge over Sam's Run Creek, Butler County. The bridge is in a very rural area and nobody actually discovered the crash victims until later that night when a local farmer passed by. The farmer went to get help and a total of 12 bodies were recovered. They were eventually identified and given proper burials. That wasn't the end of things though. Shortly after, the farmer who originally discovered the bodies claimed that while crossing the bridge one night after, his car suddenly cut out. He said that he heard 13 knocks on his car, then a hissing noise before suddenly the car just came back to life. Locals say that this is the spirit of the 13th victim, whose body was never recovered. The spirit is still said to haunt those who pass over the bridge, hoping they will be the ones to finally find its body and give them a proper burial so that they may pass on peacefully. Next up at number 7 now, we have Stony Creek Cemetery. The story goes like this. In 1825, the local caretaker in Stony Creek Cemetery in Adams County made a discovery. At the bottom of a large tree was the body of a young man. It didn't take much to figure out the cause of death, as the man's head was completely missing. Although it's hard to beat that in terms of strangeness, there was one other thing. The crime scene was clean of any blood around this headless body. The police determined the murder must have taken place somewhere else before the perpetrator then dumped the body in the cemetery. Rumours began to spread that the head had not been cut off but rather ripped off by something extremely powerful. The case remained open and unsolved for many years before entering books of folklore. There are those that say that some nights a misty figure appears under a tree in the cemetery, the ghost of this unidentified man, unable to find peace until his murder is solved. Moving on to number 6 now guys, we have Patterson Tower. There are a number of theories about the origin of this strange tower, thought to be built by a John D. Patterson many years ago. According to legend, a group of teenagers in the 1960s took refuge in the tower during a thunderstorm. As the storm raged on, a lightning bolt hit the top of the tower. Electricity surged down the metal stair rail and electrocuted 2 of the teenagers, killing them almost instantly. They say that in the weeks afterwards, you could still see their charred outlines on the tower wall. Officials blocked off the tower from dark tourists by placing metal plates across the door. Visitors still just ripped them off though to see what was inside. Legend now says that on stormy nights, the shadowy spirits of the teenagers who died can be seen in the tower. A bright bolt of lightning will illuminate their ghosts, making them glow as if they had just been hit by lightning. When the storm fades, so do they. until the next time. Coming in at number 5 now, we have Little Sugar Creek. The town of Bellbrook is sometimes referred to as Ohio's Sleepy Hollow because of all the ghostly legends that originated there. A man called James Buckley ran a sawmill there many years ago. He lived in a small cabin and grew his business to great heights, becoming the wealthiest man in the town. One night, his newfound wealth attracted some robbers. When authorities finally arrived to help him, they found Buckley's headless body outside. The murder was never solved. People say the cabin was haunted then by his spirit. Those who ventured there say they've been confronted by a headless ghost, his arms outstretched as if begging for help. In time, the sawmill was demolished, but that didn't bring an end to the sightings. Locals still say that if you wander down to Little Sugar Creek, where the sawmill once stood, you can still see the ghost of James Buckley, unable to pass on peacefully while the case of his brutal murder has been left cold. Moving on to number 4 now, we have Otterbein Cemetery. This one is also known as Bloody Horseshoe Grave. During the 1840s, an Ohioan called James Henry was involved with 2 women at the same time, Rachel Hodge and Mary Angle. He wanted to know which one to marry. One night while riding home, he fell asleep on his horse. He awoke to find his horse had not taken him home, but had instead stopped in front of Mary Angle's house. He took this as a sign, and soon he and Mary were married. As his wedding gift to her, he gave her the horse that brought them together. They lived happily, but in 1845, Mary died from one of the many prevalent diseases at the time. She was buried in Otterbein Cemetery. Henry began courting Rachel Hodge, and eventually the two were married. He gave her the same horse as a wedding gift. They hadn't been married long before locals noticed something strange about Mary's tombstone. There was a glowing outline of a horseshoe on it. James took this as a sign that Mary was displeased with his new marriage. They said he was cursed. One night, witnesses heard strange noises and lights coming from the cemetery. The next morning, James was found dead in his barn with the mark of a horseshoe on his forehead. His death was ruled an accident, as Henry had been alone in the barn at the time, all alone except for one other creature, a horse. Even today, they say a strange horseshoe mark is still visible on Mary's tombstone, and that on some nights you can hear the sound of hooves trotting up the cemetery road. Moving on to number 3 now, we have Buxton Inn. This place has been going since 1812, making it one of the oldest inns in Ohio. In the mid-1800s, Major Buxton, after whom the inn was named, took control of the inn. There have been reports of ghosts there ever since. Many of the ghosts alleged to haunt the inn are said to be of previous owners. However, there's also strange knockings people have heard coming from the basement where the stagecoach drivers would have stayed. The door to that same basement is known to open and close by itself, and there have even been reports of footsteps coming up and down the stairs there. Major Buxton's spirit is said to be a shadowy figure, often sighted in the dining room. Another owner, Orrin Granger, appears as an elderly woman wearing old-fashioned breeches who is said to steal pies from the kitchen. There's also the lady in blue, who died in the inn and is recognizable by her distinct perfume. There's even a phantom cat that enters people's rooms at night in much the same way it did when it was alive. Next up at number 2 now, we have Old Raritan. The story goes that as European settlers first began to arrive in the Ohio Valley, wolf attacks on livestock became more and more frequent. Farmers began to hunt down the wolves, possibly to the point of extinction, but none of them could have predicted what came next. One wolf in particular always managed to escape the farmers. A huge grey one became known as Old Raritan. Farmers often reported seeing him and his mate wandering through the woods, but they never could corner him. Eventually, they became the only wolves that remained. One night, the wolves were trapped with their backs against Big Rock, a famous landmark. The hunters opened fire and brought the female down. Just as the hunters set their dogs loose to finish her off, a loud cry echoed through the woods. Old Raritan leapt in front and fought the dogs off. The hunters opened fire and wounded him too. Eventually, they called off their dogs. Old Raritan dragged his now dead mate up to the top of Big Rock. Once there, he let out a thunderous howl across the backdrop of the moon and then slumped down beside his mate. All was quiet, but not forever. On certain nights, locals say you can still hear a painful howl, and that if you head to the top of Big Rock, you'll be faced with the ghost of Old Raritan, still ready to fight in his afterlife. And finally, number 1 now, we have the Bloody Bridge. Sometimes you can just tell from these titles where these stories are heading. This bridge lies just outside of Spencerville, crossing the Miami-Erie Canal. According to legend, the bridge was the site of a grisly murder in 1854. In the years before that, a rival rivalry grew between two local men, Bill Jones and Jack Billings. Both had fallen for a woman called Minnie Warren. In the end, Minnie chose Jack, sending Bill into a fit of rage. One night in 1854, Minnie and Jack began to cross the bridge on their way home from a party. At the other end though stood Bill. He was holding an axe. They didn't have time to run. Bill took one swing and severed Jack's head clean off. Minnie screamed and jumped off the bridge and into her watery grave. Bill then disappeared until his skeleton was found years later in a well. Was it suicide or revenge from the couple's family? Either way, the years since then have seen reports of ghostly images of the murdered couple on the bridge. Some even say that when the water gets dark enough, you can look over the bridge and see Minnie Warren's face staring right back at you in horror. Starting off at number 10 now, we have Gore Orphanage. Legend says that in 1903, Mr. and Mrs. Sprunger founded Gore Orphanage in Vermilion, Ohio. Soon, there were over 100 boys and girls living there. Then, rumors of the orphans' mistreatment began. The children were only allowed to wash themselves once every 2 weeks and all had to use the same exact dirty bathwater. Their rooms were infested with rats that bit them as they slept, eventually tried to escape. Sometimes alone or sometimes in groups, they braved the dark and tried to cross the river at night, hoping to find people to look after them in the nearby town. On one cold night in December 1923, Gore Orphanage caught fire. Now to this day, nobody knows how it started. Some say a child knocked over an oil lamp, others say Mr. Sprunger started the fire because he hated the children and wanted to collect the insurance money. The building burnt to the ground. Locals couldn't get close to the inferno to save them and had to listen to their screams as the orphanage was reduced to a charred husk. Legend says that you can still see their ghosts lurking in the field where the orphanage once stood. Late at night, you can hear the sounds of screaming and pleading for help. Moving on to number 9 now, we have Athens Insane Asylum. Now this building opened its doors in 1874, becoming one of Ohio's largest asylums for the mentally ill. In the beginning, things went well. It offered some of the best care to its patients. As the years went on, the owners realized that they could put some of the patients to work there, specifically on the nearby farm. The greedier they got, the more patients they took on. By the 1950s, it had become a dumping ground for anyone that a family couldn't afford or simply didn't want to look after. At 2,000 patients, it was now 3 times over its capacity, yet the number of staff remained unchanged. Patients were forcibly restrained for days at a time, left in crowded rooms meant for one person, and regularly beaten by staff. In 1993, the hospital finally closed its doors. The remaining buildings were left to Ohio University. In the years after, students would tell tales of strange figures standing in the empty wings in the former hospital. For me though, the creepy part is the report of a stain on the top floor of the building. They say it's of Margaret Skeeling, a patient who went missing in 1979. She was found 42 days later in an abandoned ward. Tests show that she died of heart failure, yet she was found naked next to her clothes folded neatly on the floor. To the horror of those who found her, the body had decomposed so badly that a stain had seeped into the actual concrete. It couldn't be scrubbed away, and they say to this day the stain can still be seen. Next up at number 8 now, we have the Melonheads. These humanoid creatures are said to be found in Lake County, Ohio. Now according to legend, the government ran a number of secret experiments on local children there. A man called Dr. Crow performed the experiments on children in an orphanage. The government hoped that they wouldn't cause as much of a stir that way because nobody would care about the children. Not my words, theirs. Or potentially theirs. The results of the experiment were shocking. The children's hair began to fall out and their bodies mutated, increasing their head to a gigantic size as a result of injecting them with excess fluid. The children feared for their lives. They grouped together and overthrew the twisted doctor, murdering him one night in the orphanage. Then they set fire to the building and fled to the woods to become feral. In the years since, locals have reported seeing fully grown adults with huge heads darting through the trees. While this is already creepy by itself, they also say that these so-called Melonheads are now cannibals, feeding on any person that wanders too close to the woods. Moving on to number 7 now, we have the Reformatory. This is an old prison built in 1896 and designed by Levi T. Schofield. He wanted the place to inspire the inmates to experience a spiritual renewal and give up their harmful lifestyle, repent their wrongdoing. In the end though, it gained a reputation for death, after more than 200 people died there over the years. These days, people say that the building is haunted by the spirits of the dead. One such person is Helen Glatke, the wife of the prison's one-time warden. She was accidentally shot in the lung when a gun fell off a shelf. Now legend says though that she actually killed herself, and the whole accident story was nothing more than a cover-up. Then there's the rumours of a prisoner setting himself on fire in his cell, an old woman roaming the grounds, and also the hole. The hole was said to be a confinement space in the basement of the prison, designed for 20 people at most. However, guards would cram it full of prisoners just to torture them. The pain and anguish suffered within the walls are said to still remain and be heard on cold dark nights. Moving on to number 6 now, we have Franklin Castle. This Victorian era building is said to be the most haunted house in Ohio, bar none. It's a bold claim, but the story seems to back it up. It was built in the 1880s by a grocer turned banker called Hans Tiedemann. Despite being rich, his life was struck by a number of tragedies. In that house, his 15-year-old daughter died, so too did his mother and 3 other children who died in infancy. His wife became so overcome with grief that she became despondent. He attempted to distract her by turning the house into a sort of castle. He built elaborate tunnels, prominent gargoyles, and a sprawling network of rooms. He stopped though when his wife also passed away. He sold the property. It changed hands a number of times over the decades, and then in the 1960s, reports of hauntings in the house began to spread. There were strange electrical surges, the sound of babies crying, and a mysterious woman in black who roamed the hallways at night. In 1975, human bones were said to be found in a closet in the house. Now since then, there have been reports of an axe murderer there. People may dispute some of the stories, but some people who visit agree that a lasting presence can definitely be felt at old Franklin Castle. Moving on to number 5 now, we have the Loveland Frogmen. This is a really weird one, guys, and I'm saying this as a guy who has done more urban legends videos than he's had hot dinners. Residents of the town of Loveland have been reporting since 1955 that amphibious men live along the river there. The first sighting occurred when a businessman claimed to have witnessed 3 bipedal quasi-reptilian entities congregating by the side of the road. The man pulled his car to the curb and watched the creatures for about 3 minutes. He described them as being 3 to 4 feet tall, covered with leathery skin and having webbed hands and feet. While they had some human-like features, he said that they had distinctly frog-like heads. Just before the creatures left, one of them seemed to wave what the witness described as a wand above its head. Like an actual magical wand. Sparks apparently came out of it. The man left, but over the years many have reported similar experiences, leaving many locals to see the frogman as just a strange part of reality. Next up at number 4 now, we have the Grassman. You can think of this one as Ohio's version of Bigfoot. It's said to have all the same characteristics, a tall bipedal hominid that skulks around Ohio's deep woods. The Grassman gets its name from apparently building small hut-like structures or nests made out of tall grass. The first sighting occurred in 1978 when some local kids ran into their grandparents' home screaming about a hairy monster they had just seen in the gravel pit outside. When the grandparents went outside to investigate, they saw it too. They said it was covered in dark matted hair, sitting in the pit and fiddling with some trash. They later estimated it to be about 300 pounds. The family fled, but it wasn't the last time that they or many other locals saw them. When people started investigating, they found records from the 1700s of Native Americans in the area who spoke of a race of bipedal ape men. They referred to them as the wild ones of the woods and would often leave food out for them in an effort to keep the peace. Next up at number 3 now, we have the Cincinnati Music Hall. This is a classical music performance hall in Cincinnati, completed in 1878. Before construction was even finished, it was said the location was a place where the dead render the lives of the living a burden to them. How intense does that sound? When a nearby canal was being made, authorities found over 100 human skeletons that had to be removed. They buried them in the ground on which this building now stands on. More remains were placed there in 1838 when a steamboat exploded and flung bodies all over the city. They were also buried in the ground below the music hall. If that wasn't enough to creep you out, it also stands atop of an old orphan asylum and an old Civil War hospital. All of this has resulted in locals claiming it's the most haunted place in town. One night watchman felt the presence of ghosts there. He said, "They never touch me, but I always know when they are around, by an icy chill, a thrill of electricity. They never annoy me now by mere knocking, for I have gotten so used to it. So used to it that sometimes when people have really knocked at the door, I didn't open, because I thought it was only the dead that kept knocking, knocking, knocking." Well, I'm glad he can be so calm with dead people knocking at the door at night. Most of us would just nope right out of there. I know I definitely would. Moving on to number 2 now, guys, we have Lake Hope Furnace. During the Industrial Revolution, this furnace was used to process iron ore gathered from the area's sandstone bedrock. After 20 years, the furnace is shut down, but some say creepy stories still remain. They say that in order to ensure the furnace continued operating at night, watchmen were employed to tend to the furnace fires. On one fateful night, a watchman was walking along the platform with his lantern when he slipped in the darkness and fell into the bubbling ore inside the furnace. He screamed out for help, but was consumed in seconds. Now, legend says that on stormy nights, a ghostly watchman returns to make his rounds. There have been dozens of reports of a dark figure carrying a lantern walking along the top of Lake Hope Furnace. Some even say the figure continues pacing back and forth across the furnace until lightning strikes nearby, causing him to disappear until the next stormy night. And finally now, at the number 1 spot, we have the Wickerham Inn. In the 1790s, a man called Peter Wickerham moved to Adams County, Ohio and opened an inn. It was very popular and saw many coach drivers and locals stopping there to drink, eat and converse. One night though, a driver was bragging to the whole inn about how much money he was carrying. Some men in the corner of the room hatched a plan. As he headed to bed, they jumped him, brutally murdering him on the spot. When he didn't appear for checkout the next morning, an employee was sent to check on him. They returned a moment later, pale as a sheet and visibly shaken. When the others entered the room, they saw a horrible sight. The room was covered in blood, absolutely everywhere. On the floor, the blood had seeped into the floorboards, creating the bloody outline of a headless body. But, perhaps even more shockingly, there was no head. Peter Wickerham feared this would be the end of his business. He ordered everything in the room to be taken out and burnt. He also told them to scrub the floor and remove that bloody outline, but no matter how hard they tried, the outline would not fade. Around that same time, people reported seeing the ghostly outline of a headless man peering out of the upstairs window. A long time passed, and in the 1920s, the inn was renovated. In the basement, the stone floor was removed to install a new heating system. As they pulled up the old flooring, they recoiled in horror at the sight of a complete human skeleton, complete except for the skull.
At number 10, we have the green clawed beast. Imagine you're out enjoying your afternoon, lounging on an inner tube, floating in the river, when all of a sudden you are attacked by a creature. Because that is exactly what happened to a woman named Naomi Johnson. On August 21st of 1955, Miss Johnson was out enjoying a swim with her friend in Ohio River near Evansville, Indiana. While swimming, Miss Johnson said that she was suddenly grabbed and pulled underwater by a large, hairy claw hand. She struggled underwater until she was able to kick herself free. She resurfaced only to shortly be pulled under again by this creature. Thankfully, Miss Johnson managed to escape once again. When she reached land, she had multiple bruises and wounds on her leg, one of which was a green claw print shaped hand. Now, Miss Johnson never got a good look at the creature, but could sense how big and strong it was from the force it used on her. This encounter was reported to an Air Force colonel who took detailed notes and then told Miss Johnson and her friend to never mention it again. Very suspicious. What is this man hiding? Was it a creature of his own that escaped? No one knows. But what they do know is to never swim in that river again. In our 8th spot, we have Walhalla Road. Located in North Columbus, this road is supposedly one of the scariest roads in Ohio. Legend has it that around 1950, a doctor by the name of Mooney and his wife and kids used to live among the road. It is said that one night Mr. Mooney lost his mind and murdered his family along this road. Apparently, if you walk this road in the dead of night, then you will see the ghost of Dr. Mooney murdering his family. You will also be able to hear them screaming and hollering. Like, the name of the road is literally Walhalla, like holla, like get it? Just a weird coincidence. Also, if you walk this road at night, it is said that you can see an eerie blue light appearing from the attic of the Mooney's old mansion. Coming in at number 7, we have Loveland Castle. Although it may sound like a nice place to go for a honeymoon, don't be fooled. It's not. Well, maybe if you guys have a thing for ghosts. Not judging. Now, this castle was actually handmade by a man named Harry Andrews back in 1929. Harry was obsessed with medieval times and architecture and decided to build this towering castle in the middle of the Midwest. Andrew passed away in April of 1981 at the age of 91. Loveland Castle is now a museum spot for tourists to visit. It is said that people have seen a shadowy figure roam the halls that resembles Harry. Typically, this ghost makes an appearance when something in the castle is going to go wrong. This may be Harry's way of still looking after the castle after passing away. In fact, one time, sounds of slamming doors could be heard upstairs. Upon investigation, they noticed that the septic tank was about to overflow. They believe that the slamming doors was Harry's way to warn them about this. And lastly, there's also said to be another spirit roaming the castle. This spirit is referred to as the Viking entity. Now, people believe that this entity is attached to one of Harry's antique swords in the castle. This Viking can be seen in a long black cloak, carrying a sword at his chest. Moving on to number 6, we have Riders Inn. Now, if you ever need a place to stay in Ohio, don't worry, I got you covered with a list of haunted inns not to stay at. Now, on this list is a bed and breakfast known as Riders Inn. In this inn, you can enjoy their restaurant, comfy accommodations, and of course, 3 ghosts. The first ghost that people have claimed to see is of a man dressed in a Civil War uniform. Now, both the other 2 ghosts are Roxanne and Susanna, the second and third wives of the inn's founder, Joseph Ryder. Apparently, Roxanne is a friendly ghost, whereas Susanna causes trouble around the inn. Inn residents have stated that they have been let into the inn by a woman in a white nightgown when the doors should have been locked. This was either the ghost of Roxanne or Susanna. Now, may I mention that this inn is literally located on a street named Painesville? Like, what are the odds? We are now at our halfway mark with number 5. The Witch's Ball. What's a scary legend without some witches? Myrtle Hill Cemetery in Medina County is known for getting quite the group of interested people. Among all the graves, there's one in particular that stands out, and that's because it's marked with a giant sphere. This story revolves around a woman that endured a lot of suffering throughout her life. As a result, she ended up murdering her family members. She would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for those meddling kids and their dog. Just kidding. But I love Scooby-Doo. Classic. But seriously, she would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for the town members who realized that her family just started to disappear. They believed that she was a witch and she was practicing her magic in the woods. As a result, she was stoned to death and buried under the giant sphere. Now, apparently she was buried standing up to make it hard for her to escape, and the spear was put on top as another precaution to make sure she never arose. However, it is said that her spirit has found a way to escape. In the wintertime, snow will not fall on the sphere or the ground around it. On top of that, if you touch the spear, it will appear warm from the witch's energy, and in the summer, it will appear cold. People have also claimed that they have seen her figure in the woods by the cemetery or even seen an eye on the ball itself. Coming in at number 4, we have the Akron Civic Theater. Built in 1929 by Marcus Lowe, the Akron Civic Theater is a nice place to watch theatrical performances and even see ghosts. Although this theater is beautiful, it has a much darker past. Now, there is said to be 3 ghosts that haunt this theater. The first ghost is of a janitor named Fred. Fred apparently was the janitor for the theater and passed away one evening on his shift. Fred's ghost has been seen throughout the theater, and in fact, one person reported seeing him standing just outside the main entrance. It is also said that Fred becomes angry for anyone that dirties up the bathroom and will chase or attack them. No thanks. I'd rather hold it in if that's the case. The second ghost is of a man who is said to be a frequent theater goer or even of an actor that used to work there. He is said to lurk on the balcony and is fashionably dressed. And the last ghost is of a woman who died after jumping into the canal, which is below the theater. Her spirit is still said to roam the theater and is often heard crying. Let's move on to number 3 with the Headless Ghost. In October of 1889, a train conductor by the name of John Walsh was bringing the train along the Nickel Plate Railroad in Arcadia. While waiting for the signal that would allow him to continue traveling, he noticed that a section of the train cars had disconnected. While trying to reconnect them, the other missing section came barreling towards him, smashing his head between the 2 cars. In January of 1890, it is said that an engineer has seen John's ghost. Apparently, at night you can see John's headless ghost roaming the tracks looking for his, well, lost head. It is also said that he carries a lantern which he swings back and forth, and people have seen the eerie glow of his lantern at night. And in our number 1 spot, we have the West Branch Witch. Another witch-related legend. Surprise, surprise. In the West Branch State Park of Portage County, there have been many claims of people encountering a woman dressed in all black. The first appearance was reported in 1960 by a man named B.A. Evans. He recently purchased a piece of land and later discovered a small cemetery on it. This cemetery contains 7 gravestones surrounded by a 40-inch wall. The gravestones are apparently from a family named the Elliots. The headstone that gets the most attention is that of Clemenza. Clemenza was apparently killed by a group of townspeople after being accused of being a witch. As a result, she was pressed. Basically, a wooden board was placed on her and then on top was piled with stones until her body was crushed by the weight. To this day, her grave is marked by a pile of stones that rests on top of it. It is said that she haunts the graveyard and the surrounding area. In fact, on her tombstone is a curse that says, "Remember youth as you pass by. As you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so must you be. Prepare for death and follow me." If you read it out loud by her grave, she will apparently chase you away. Now, this legend continues, saying that one night a group of kids took stones from Clemenza's grave. Later on, they died on their way home in a car accident, but the one kid that didn't take the stone survived. So any geologists out there, I recommend not taking any rocks from this site.
Going off at number 10 now, we have the Grunch. This one comes from Louisiana. In the early days of New Orleans, there was a road called Grunch Road that went deep into the swampy woods before coming to a dead end. That is where the Grunch people lived, a strange hybrid of albinos and dwarves, forced away from society and made to live in their own community. As the years went by, people started to doubt the story's authenticity, but it sparked up again when people started disappearing down Grunch Road. Nearby farmers reported their animals missing or finding them dead and drained of blood. Many locals now refuse to head down Grunch Road for fear of meeting the same fate. Moving on to number 9 now, we have Stull Cemetery. To those that know the story, Stull Cemetery in Kansas is better known as the doorway to hell. Legend says that the devil himself chose the cemetery as his entrance from the underworld to our own. Now, it's said that a tree once stood in the cemetery and an old tombstone there was inscribed with the word witch. The tree was used to hang condemned witches back in the day who were put to death by the locals. The tombstone apparently marks the burial spot of Satan's own child, a creature born deformed and covered in wolf hair. In modern times, the legend has continued with reports of the ground catching fire in random spots. Pope John Paul II was said to divert his private plane around the cemetery because it was so tainted by evil. Now, whether or not you believe all of that, there's plenty of videos on YouTube to check out if you're interested, and I find them quite creepy. At number 7 now, we have the Charman. This story goes that in 1948, a wildfire swept across Ojai, California. The flames consumed a cabin where a man lived with his son. He was burned alive, but the son survived, just barely though. When the authorities arrived, they found a shocking scene. The father had been flayed alive. His skin had been removed from his body and peeled off. His body was just hanging from a nearby tree. The police then searched for the perpetrator. They heard a wheezing sound from a nearby bush, and then suddenly the son just bolted out of it. The overpowering smell of him stunned the officers, and in that moment the boy ran into the trees and then escaped into the hills. In the years since then, many locals have said they've seen the Charman in the woods, horribly disfigured by his burns and tormented by his past. He's said to creep up on the tents of innocent campers in the hills, waiting for them to fall asleep. Coming at number 6 now, we have Hell's Gate Bridge. This one comes from Oxford, Alabama. The story goes that in the 1950s, a young couple crashed their car off the side of this bridge and drowned. Now, some locals believe you cross the bridge at your own peril. One story is that if you drive your car out to the middle of the bridge and then turn off all the lights, the couple will appear in your car just sitting behind you. When you turn around, they'll be gone, leaving a wet seat behind. The other story is that if you drive over the bridge and then look over your shoulder about halfway through, the scenery behind you turns into a portal to hell, just spouting fire and flames. Now, whether or not you believe all of this, it's enough for some people to just look for a different way to cross the river. Moving on to number 5 now, we have 100 Steps Cemetery. This is located in the town of Brazil in Indiana. Interesting name for a town, and the cemetery is even more interesting. It's been used for at least 150 years, and in that time it's gained quite a sinister reputation for a ghostly undertaker. The story goes that as you walk up the many steps to the top of the cemetery, you must count each and every step. When you reach the top, you must turn towards the open field, and then the ghost of the cemetery's first undertaker will appear. Without saying anything, he will then reveal reveal your own death to you in a vision. Straight away you must proceed back down the steps and count each one again. If the number is different to the one that you counted on the way up, the vision was true. An added bonus is that if anyone tries to cheat and climb up or down without using the steps, a ghostly hand will push them to the ground, leaving a red imprint on their back for days as a mark of the devil. Definitely not a place to go for just a Sunday walk then. Next up at number 4 now we have the Goat Man of Pope Lick. I love my job because I get to say sentences like that. This is an old Kentucky urban legend about a hideous being who roams the woods across that state. Those who have seen him describe the Goat Man as having dark fur, pale skin, goat legs and twisted horns. Some people say he was an escaped circus freak, others say he was a farmer who tortured goats for Satan. Satan then repaid him by turning him into a tortured goat himself. The Goat Man is said to hide under the rusty bridge that crosses Pope Lick Creek in Louisville. Legend says he lures people onto the train tracks there and then takes pleasure in them being hit by oncoming trains. Please don't go looking for this one though, guys. In 2016 a woman actually fell to her death from the bridge while looking for the Goat Man. Alright, next up at number 2 now we have the Black Angel. This statue looks very creepy as it is. An old, worn, corroded angel staring down over Oakland Cemetery in Iowa City. Her sinister appearance has helped spawn a number of different legends around her. One of them says that a pregnant woman should never walk under her lest they want to lose their unborn child. Another says that if you kiss or perhaps even just touch the statue, you'll be dead within 6 months. This is the kind of story that scares everyone off. Whether or not you believe in curses, it's just not even worth thinking about. And finally, number 1 now we have Cropsey. Many New Yorkers know the story of Cropsey, the boogeyman of Staten Island. Legend says that he was an escaped patient from a mental asylum who went on a murderous rampage. He had a hook for a hand which he would then use to drag children back to the abandoned ruins of Seaview Hospital. Pretty creepy stuff, but here's where it gets really scary. Many parents would tell this story to their kids to scare them into being cautious about strangers, even if they didn't really believe the story themselves. But then in the 1970s, a real killer called Andre Rand really did start hunting children in a very similar way. Was he using the Cropsey legend as cover? Either way, people now take the legend a lot more seriously. Starting off at number 10 now, we have the Murfreesboro Mud Monster. In 1973, a young couple went for a romantic drive near the town of Murfreesboro, Illinois. They parked up by the river. Later on, they heard a piercing roar, which they described as sounding like an eagle shrieking into a microphone. They quickly turned off the radio and scanned the area. Another horrific shriek came and the bush in front of them shook. They turned on the car lights to see a creature that would forever be burned into their memories. It was massive, wet, hairy and covered in mud. Its skin was almost translucent, as if it was an albino. For the next 2 weeks it terrorized people in the town. Reports of the 7-foot-tall swamp monster kept increasing until one day it just disappeared. After that there have only been a few more reports of the Murfreesboro Mud Monster since. At the time the local police chief said, "A lot of things in life are unexplained, and this is another one. We don't know what the creature is, but we do believe what these people saw was real." Moving on to number 9 now, we have the Little People's Village. In the woods of Connecticut near the town of Middlebury, you can find the Little People's Village. Crumbling remains of tiny houses and structures that locals say were built for fairies. The story goes that many years ago, a man and his wife were living peacefully in Middlebury when she started seeing small fairy folk in the woods around their home. She demanded that her husband build them a tiny village, and so that's exactly what he did. Using real concrete and mortar, he built the fairies these tiny houses complete with walkways and streets. As the village grew, he suffered a price. People say that he began to hear the fairies' voices in his head, which eventually drove him to madness and then now, they say the crumbling ruins of the Little People's Village is haunted by the spirits of them, or even the ghosts of the people they drove insane. You can still visit the ruins today, and even sit in the throne that was carved at the request of the king of the Little People. However, legend says the seat is now cursed, and that if you sit in it, you will be dead within 7 years. Locals will show you how to get to the village of the Little People, but many also warn that if you linger there too long, you will hear the voices of the Little People, and you too will be plunged into insanity. Next up at number 8 now, we have the Kushtaka. These are mythical shape-shifting creatures found in the stories of Native Americans in southeastern Alaska. The name roughly translates to land otter man. The story says that these creatures will shift between the human form and the otter form at will. They are cruel creatures who take pleasure in tricking sailors to their deaths. If they're not at sea, they live in rivers and deploy a very creepy tactic to attract their prey. The Kushtaka are said to imitate the cries of a human baby, or or the screams of a woman in order to lure the victims to the river. Once there, the kushtaka either kill the person by tearing them to shreds or turn them into a kushtaka themselves. Legend says that they can be warded off by using copper, urine, dogs or fire. Some stories do tell of benevolent kushtaka who will help people, but many feel it's simply not worth the risk to approach them if they ever do hear its cries in the Alaskan forest. Next up at number 7 now we have the spectre moose. In Maine, people have been spotting a particular moose for over 100 years. This one stands out though, as they say it's spectral, a ghost moose if you will. It's also huge, standing some 10 to 15 feet high. It was first seen in the early 1900s when locals described it as a huge moose with a ghostly, dirty white color and an enormous set of antlers. The coat of the animal is sometimes described as glowing faintly. The spectre moose was said to have an extremely acute sense of smell and hearing, as well as the ability to appear or disappear at will and to phase through solid objects. Hunters who came across it said they could never line up properly for a shot, as the moose would just blink in and out of existence before their very eyes. In 1938, a hunter said he saw it standing among a herd of other mises. Not sure. It was stood with 2 other large males, but it made them look like dwarfs. He would have thought it was just a normal, humongous moose if it wasn't for the strange white glow around its body. Moving on to number 6 now, we have Betty Grease. In Michigan, on the beaches of Lake Superior, is a place where the sand is said to sing. Local legend says that a musical voice emanates from the sand, the voice of a Native American maid who lost her love to the Great Lakes and still calls to him from the shore when visitors play the sand. How exactly do you play the sand? Well, they say the sand can be made to sing by pressing down on it with the palm of your hand or a piece of bark. It loses its magical properties though when removed from the beach. I wasn't too sure what to make of this one at first, but I've seen a few videos on YouTube now and it definitely makes a very strange noise. Perhaps you guys check it out and see what you make of it. Next up at number 5 now we have the hauntings at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel. This historic hotel is over 90 years old and has hosted some of the biggest stars in Hollywood over the years. The 12-story high building has 300 guest rooms and 63 suites, some of which are said to be haunted. 2 of the ghosts are actually famous ghosts. Montgomery Clift is said to haunt room 928, the room he stayed in while filming From Here to Eternity. People say he moves around the occupants' luggage, while others have said they've seen him in the hallways rehearsing lines for his movie or playing the trumpet. The other celebrity haunting is someone a lot more famous, Marilyn Monroe. She is said to haunt the full-length mirror that was once in her suite. Since she stayed in the hotel, the mirror has been relocated from her room, but the hauntings still follow it. People report seeing the ghostly apparition of Marilyn standing over their shoulder. Some people might like that, definitely not me. Moving on to number 4 now, we have the bus to nowhere. This one comes from Pennsylvania. Some say that this state is home to a bus that goes nowhere. It picks up hopeless people and keeps them on it forever unless they are able to shake out of its trance. The bus is said to have no displays, no route number and no destination. It only stops for people who want to leave where they are but have no destination in mind. Philadelphians often say they've seen it winding through the city streets. Some people also call it the wandering bus or simply zero. People say that once you're on the bus, you sit like everyone else, staring out of the window, wrapped in your own thoughts, desperate to get away from whatever pain and despair is in your life. You can pull the cord anytime when you're ready to disembark, but be warned. Legend says that time does not move the same on the bus to nowhere. Your trip could have lasted minutes, days, months, or in some cases years. The only silver lining is that when the passengers finally do disembark, they find themselves exactly where they're supposed to be. Next up at number 3 now we have the Snallygaster. This is a mythical dragon-like beast said to inhabit central Maryland. It was first described by German immigrants who called it the Schnellergeist, which translates to quick ghost. It's been described as being half bird, half reptile, and with a strange metallic beak lined with razor-sharp teeth. Some even say it has octopus-like tentacles. It swoops down silently from the sky and carries its human victims off to its den, where it then sucks them dry of blood. Newspaper reports from February and March 1909 describe encounters between local residents and a beast with enormous wings, a long pointed bill, claws like steel hooks, and an eye in the center of of its forehead. They said its screech sounded like a locomotive whistle. Now, other than the humans it hunts, the snallygaster is also said to have one mortal enemy, the deweo. The deweo is reported to be a mammalian biped that looks like a wolf but stands like a human. It's been reported all over Maryland, and locals have said they've seen vicious battles between the two creatures. Moving on to number 2 now, we have Huggin' Molly. You might think her name sounds quite nice. Everyone needs a hug from time to time, probably not from Molly. Generations of people from Alabama have grown up with this very creepy legend. They said Molly is a giant ghost, at least 7 feet tall, who wanders the streets of Abbeville, Alabama. Late at night, she can be seen dragging her long black skirt as she goes. If you see her, run, because if she sees you, she will chase you and she will get you. Once she does, she picks you up with her huge arms and gives you the tightest hug of your life while screaming in your ear. They say the horrible sound she makes never leaves you. There have been no reports of Huggin' Molly ever killing someone, but her attacks are enough to strike fear into the hearts of everyone around. And finally, at number 1, we have the Carter brothers. In New Orleans in the 1930s, a young girl ran into a police station begging for help. She said that 2 local businessmen, John and Wayne Carter, have been keeping her hostage and feeding off her blood. She showed them the cuts on her wrist, not quite enough to kill her, but just enough to extract blood from. The police rushed to the apartment to find 4 other women tied to chairs with their wrists slit in a similar fashion. In another room, they also found 12 bodies that had been drained of their blood. The police staked the place out and waited for the men to return. When they did, it took 8 police officers to hold them down and restrain them. Their strength seemed superhuman. The pair were executed for their crimes and buried in a sealed tomb. Years later, another member of the Carter family died. They opened up the tomb to lay them to rest and found that the bodies of John and Wayne Carter were gone. No remains, no clothes, no trace that they have ever been there at all. New Orleans became gripped with the legend of these vampire brothers who could escape death itself. To this day, many sightings of the brothers have still been reported, especially around the apartment building that they once called home. Or perhaps they still do. They've just learned their lesson to keep things more hidden. Starting off at number 10 now, we have the skunk ape. No, that's not my nickname. This is actually one of the most famous mysterious creatures said to wander from Florida to North Carolina and even Arkansas. As you guys might expect from the skunk part of the name, this thing doesn't smell great. Ever since the first sightings of it in the 1960s, people have mentioned the horrific smell of this thing. Often you can smell it before even seeing it. When you finally do, it looks like an ape. Big, hairy, and running on 2 legs. For some people, the skunk ape isn't just a rumor, it's a reality. Dave Shealy is the man who established the official skunk ape research headquarters. He said there is not only 1 or 2, but 9 of these creatures living in the Florida Everglades alone. He spent most of his life trying to document them. According to Shealy, the average male skunk ape stands 6 to 7 feet tall and weighs roughly 450 pounds. Females are 5 to 6 feet tall and weigh in at about 250 pounds. Moving on to number 9 now, we have Charman. Ohio's Camp Comfort County Park is a picturesque place in California. It's also known for being home to many creepy spirits. There's a ghost of a bride wearing a bloody wedding dress, a woman on a horse reenacting her own death for eternity, and even a headless motorcyclist. However, none are as terrifying or as famous as Charman. Ever since a fire in 1948 killed a number of people there have been reports of this hideous figure wandering the area. He's said to have skin burnt to a crisp and noxious fumes pouring out of him. Some people go even further and say that this creature isn't even human at all. They say Charman is a beast, an entity that has visited people a number of times, and it always goes the same way. They say their homes are engulfed in thick black fumes that send them to sleep. Just before losing consciousness, they see Charman walking towards them. When they wake up, there will be a small fire nearby, a reminder that Charman has paid a visit. Next up at number 8 now, we have Turnbull Canyon. They say death awaits everyone at Turnbull Canyon. Located in Whittier, California, the canyon is known as a pretty dangerous place, as it is thanks to the mountain lions and rattlesnakes that call it home. Some people believe that the most dangerous thing there, though, is the paranormal activity. It's said that the Gabrielino Native Americans called this place the place of the devil. The Spanish killed many of them who refused to convert to Catholicism. Some say their tortured souls now haunt the canyon. Then, in the 19th century, members of the tribe who worked in the area reported seeing ghosts and witches in burial grounds there. The sightings became more more frequent, and reports started of there being a satanic cult that had taken root in the canyon. They were supposedly sacrificing children from a nearby orphanage. When locals got wind of what was happening, the cult disappeared overnight, but the reports of ghosts, creatures, and hooded figures still appear from time to time. Moving on to number 7 now, we have the Night Watchers. We're moving over to Hawaii now for this one. We all know it looks like paradise, but as we've seen in our last few videos, it's no stranger to some creepy urban legends. One of them is the Night Marchers. Locals say they are ghostly apparitions that can be seen walking in formation at night, never stopping, always facing forward, and there is always the sound of a beating drum echoing out in the silence of the night. Hawaiians say they are armed spirit warriors en route to a battle. They carry old weapons and are clothed in decorated helmets and cloaks. The next question is naturally, why do they appear? Well, some say they are restless souls looking to reclaim rightful territory or replay a battle gone wrong, hoping this time they can do it right. Or perhaps it's a simple ghost tale of avenging their own deaths. The creepiest theory I heard though is that they're searching for an entrance to the next world. Instead of just wandering aimlessly for it like other ghosts, they do it how a soldier knows best, in a focused, methodical manner. There are signs that the Night Marchers are out on the Hawaiian Islands. They are recognized by their raised torches and repeated chants. Sometimes footprints have been found, even though the Night Marchers are said to float a few inches off the ground. Moving on to number 6 now, we have the Voodoo Queen. Louisiana is a place steeped in voodoo history. For people in New Orleans, few stories rival that of Voodoo Queen Marie Laveau. She was said to be a prestigious woman who worked as a hairdresser in the city. She chatted to every customer she had, not just for the sake of it, but to get information. Eventually, she learned the secrets of everyone in the city, man and woman, rich and poor. She used this information to manipulate her enemies through voodoo. It's said she gained the power of immortality from a demonic force known by the name of Papa Legba. She wanted to do this so that she could kill innocent beings and seek revenge on those who had wronged her. Others say that she never murdered anyone and used her voodoo skills to unite people. She also blended Catholicism and voodoo to form a religion that is still practiced in the area today. She died in 1881 at the age of 87, but the story did not end there. According to local legend, she returns to life once a year on St. John's Eve to lead the faithful in worship. If you're ever in New Orleans on that night, don't be surprised if you see a ghost of the Voodoo Queen looking for her followers. Moving on to number 5 now, we have the Rougarou. We're staying in Louisiana now for this one. The Rougarou is a werewolf creature that has been sighted across French Louisiana for centuries. The creature is said to have all the familiar tropes of a werewolf: huge, leering, covered in fur, and ready to tear any human to shreds. It differs from a classic werewolf though, in that the Rougarou is said to have a genetic disorder rather than catching its disease from someone else or being cursed into it by a witch. A Rougarou is a totally normal person until one day when their condition is just turned on. Their body is enlarged and they develop an insatiable craving for raw meat. They will remain in this painful state until they complete their transformation, and there's only one way to do that: to take a bite of human flesh. Those who have seen a Rougarou describe it as huge, standing between 7 to 8 feet tall, with massive sharp teeth and deep glowing red eyes. It becomes its animal form on the night of a full moon. For many people, the Rougarou is far scarier than a typical werewolf because the person doesn't even know they are one until it's far too late. It could be your friend, your family member, it could be me, or it could even be you. Next up at number 4 now, we have the Skinwalkers. In traditional Navajo culture, the Skinwalker is a witchcraft practitioner who wears the skins of various animals. A Skinwalker can morph into a number of different creatures, including coyotes, wolves, bears, crows, and owls. In the past century or so, those outside of the Navajo people have also reported seeing Skinwalkers. They've been described as half-human monstrosities who run on 2 legs at insanely fast speeds. One woman claimed that a Skinwalker appeared on a Navajo reservation land. It ran alongside her car at 60 miles per hour, darted in front, and then disappeared into the night. They're often said to let out a screeching howl of laughter as they run circles around terrified people. Sightings like this have led many people to become interested in Skinwalkers and want to interview Navajo tribes people to find out more about them. The problem is, there is a deep superstition among the Navajo people when it comes to talking about about skinwalkers. Many of the elders believe it's not good to talk or even hear about skinwalkers, otherwise you will attract them to you. Let's hope we don't do that after discussing them in this video. Next up, number 3 now, we have Stowe Lake. Stowe Lake lies in Golden Gate Park in California. It's said to be home to a ghost that not only appears to visitors but can also be summoned by them. According to locals, the ghost of Stowe Lake was a mother whose baby fell into the lake. Now they say that she can be summoned by standing on the edge of the lake and saying exactly these words: white lady, I have your baby. You will have to repeat it 3 times and then she will appear. The best place to do this is said to be next to the Pioneer Women and Children statue. That in itself is said to be quite a spooky statue as it changes expressions at night. If she deems you worthy enough, then she will appear to you and immediately ask you for her baby. If you say that you have the baby, she will haunt you until the day you die. If you say you don't, she'll drag you down to the lake herself. Coming in number 2 now, we have the legend of Chloe. This is said to be the ghost of a girl that haunts Myrtle's plantation in LA. One day, a teacher took a picture with one of her students on a field trip there. It has since become famous among the paranormal community. Behind them there appears to be the ghost of a girl standing in the window. She appears to be looking directly into the camera. The owners say this is Chloe, and it's not the first time that she's been seen. The picture was sent to the Society of Physical Research in England, founded in 1882, claimed to be the oldest and most prestigious paranormal research group in the world. They found nobody had tampered with or edited the photograph, leading to many people saying this is proof of Chloe's existence. The photograph has now been sent around the whole world, always with a request for an explanation, but so far none have emerged. And finally, number 1 now, we have the Devil Man of Algiers. We're returning again to Louisiana for this one. Algiers is the oldest neighborhood in New Orleans. This story dates back to 1938 when reports of a man terrorizing couples spread around the city. When asked to describe the man, some details were disputed, but one thing everyone agreed on was that this man was undoubtedly, categorically, the devil. He was described as having eyes like a chicken, with bright pink star-shaped ears and long black horns. He also rode on thin air and shape-shifted while announcing himself as the devil. The most common reports involved him terrorizing bars, attacking women, and appearing before local couples. People who saw the Devil Man say they always felt a sense of oncoming death or dread, that they even saw their lives flash before their very eyes. Perhaps the most scary story comes from a young couple. They said as they were traveling home one evening, a strange person tried to stop their car. They slowed the car and asked what he wanted. He asked for a ride to a nearby town. The couple felt uncomfortable though, and so they politely declined. Later, as they drove down the highway, they saw the same man walking along the side of the road. They drove past him, but after just 10 minutes, there he was again, walking by the side of the road. Again, he asked them to stop and requested a ride, and again they refused. When they saw him again, he changed into the devil before their own eyes. They sped off again, and then there he was, this time riding a brown horse. They rushed to tell the police, who went to investigate. The police saw him and requested that he stops. When he didn't, they fired shots into him. He jumped off the horse and sprayed the bullets back at them, laughing and rubbing his hairy hands together. He was brought to jail, where he quickly slipped out of his cell and into New Orleans legends.